CyberCube has recently published a new report looking at the VMware ransomware trends that are affecting companies across the globe. I'm Yvette Essen, Head of Content Communications and Creative for CyberCube, and I'm joined today in studio by William Altman. Now, William Altman is the author of the report. He is Cyber Threat Intelligence Principal at CyberCube, and he heads up Concierge, our Cyber Threat Intelligence service. William, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today, Yvette. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It is an ongoing event, like you mentioned, so it's not only that we're trying to show people what's happened here, but we are actually in the process of warning our clients to take proactive actions using our technology and our data to help prepare themselves for this event. So we can talk more about that, but it is really an ongoing event as we speak. So worth noting across the entire cyber insurance landscape, from brokers to underwriters to reinsurers, there's actions to take and lessons to be learned across all three groups.
William, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing about that advice you have for insurers, reinsurers, and the brokers community as well. But perhaps you could start and set the scene, really. When did this all begin, and what exactly do we know to date?
Yeah, Yvette, it has really started around February 3rd and has really evolved over the course of 2 weeks. So we saw an initial response from the French and Italian computer emergency response teams warning the world that an active ransomware campaign was targeting VMware ESXi hypervisor technologies that are outdated and vulnerable throughout the world. So what does this really mean? What we have here is a group of threat actors that are using a 2-year-old known vulnerability in some widely used software to automate the delivery of ransomware onto the servers that are vulnerable throughout the world. What we're seeing is that these servers are critical cloud infrastructure, and when they are encrypted, it's not just the server that's encrypted, but because of what these servers do, they actually are encrypting 120 different virtual machines on those servers, which greatly impacts the number of entities impacted. Today, we've seen just over 2,000 servers encrypted globally, up to 120 different machines on those computers globally. So we see a lot of victims here. Thousands of devices have been encrypted around the world. The threat actors are continuing to innovate and improve their code so that they can route defenses that have come out in recent days for this attack. And like I said, it's still ongoing. I think total, we could see up to 70,000 vulnerable VMware hypervisors. The threat actors may only hit a fraction of that, but it really goes to show the increases in innovation and threat actor capabilities that we're now facing as an insurance community and as a cybersecurity and defense ecosystem. And we're now able to say, look, threat actors have the capability to go out and hit critical cloud resources, and they can encrypt data on cloud servers, and they can actually receive ransoms from that activity. So it really is a seismic shift in threat actor capability and the intent that we see behind these ransomware attacks.
When did we last see something on this scale or potential scale?
We've seen several events in the past that give us some indication of how this might unfold. I think the most readily available one is the Kaseya VSA attacks. Those were an attack in which threat actors broke into a managed service provider and were able to drop ransomware onto the networks of that MSP's clients. We saw I think somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 different companies impacted. So already to date, we know that the VMware ESXi ransomware campaign is going to be worse than that in terms of total volume and entities and devices impacted or encrypted. Whether or not the threat actors can monetize this type of activity is a whole nother element to this attack. We've seen the threat actors in the Kaseya incidents not be able to actually monetize the attack. They're doing better this time around in the ESXi attack, but they still have not really been able to actually provision decryption keys and receive ransoms at scale. So we do expect that this attack, while devastating to a lot of victims is not as bad as it could be, and we expect to see this type of activity in the future as threat actors figure out more and more how to monetize this type of activity. It also points to the idea that threat actors are increasingly going after this one-to-many angle, where they want to hit one target, which allows access to many other downstream targets. That's also what we're seeing in this event.
With all this activity that could happen, we have published a report, we've published a press release out talking about the kinds of companies that could be impacted, the sectors. Perhaps you could elaborate on that. How do we construct such a list and such a target list?
Absolutely. I mean, this really gets into those actions that CyberCube clients can take based on our data and analytics and our services in light of this event. So let's start with, first and foremost, how do you know if companies in your portfolio are going to be vulnerable to this attack? In order for those companies to be vulnerable, they have to have either an internet-facing ESRI hypervisor with a certain software installed on it that has the known vulnerabilities for this attack. That's one way they're vulnerable. The other way they're vulnerable is if they rely on a cloud services provider that is using this technology to provision those services to their underlying customer. Both of those types of entities will be impacted in this attack. So you have to understand in your portfolio which companies are potentially using ESRI hypervisors in the outdated versions, and which companies are reliant on the cloud providers most impacted in the attack. So today, CyberCube's single point of failure intelligence tool can allow you to do both of those. We can actually look across a portfolio of companies and see which ones are using the vulnerable technologies. We can also see which ones are using the cloud providers that are impacted. So to date, that would be like the major French cloud provider OVH, which is the entity primarily impacted in this attack, and their downstream customers who are impacted. So we can do more triangulation around specific technologies that are in use to really drill down on which companies might be vulnerable in this attack. And that is primarily how we're helping our clients today. They're either doing proactive outreach to those entities to try to warn them or prepare them for this type of an attack, or they're using it to start estimating losses potentially from this attack. I'll note one more interesting point about this from CyberCube. We are today using our industry exposure databases and our economic exposure databases to identify vulnerable companies throughout the US that we know to have cyber insurance. So if you're interested in that kind of analysis and looking at the whole market and how it could be impacted, CyberCube can also help there.
So William, tell us, what are the companies that are likely to be impacted? Are they a particular sector? And are they a certain size?
Great question, Yvette. I mean, this is really what people want to know today. Who is impacted? And from our analysis, we can tell you that from an industry perspective, banking, agriculture, education, aviation, these types of entities and businesses that tend to stand up their own infrastructure because they're large enough and they have separate security and cloud computing needs that warrant virtualization infrastructure. And so we see those industries being the ones that have the most use of ESRI hypervisors, could potentially be the more opportunities for threat actors to compromise those companies in those sectors. We also generally see that large billion-dollar plus revenue businesses are the ones that are mostly impacted by this, at least from the standpoint that they have the ESRI hypervisors in use, which makes sense. They are large enough to require virtualization services for that large-scale cloud computing deployment. So big businesses across industries that are like banking, education, aviation, and agriculture, some manufacturing as well, we see as being potentially more vulnerable today.
Thank you for explaining all of that, William. Now, more information about the attacks that have been taking place with the VMware ransomware is available on our website, www.cybercube.com. You can find our press release there, our new report, and also follow up on our concierge service offering. For CyberCube, I'm Yvette Essen.